The big story that we're covering here today on Talk Radio: tensions mounting between the UK and France over migrant crossings in the Channel after the number of people who've reached UK shores in small boats this year surpassed 4,000. The UK Immigration Minister has said this is unacceptable, this increase in numbers. It simply cannot go on. Chris Philip is due to meet his French counterpart in Paris tomorrow to discuss stronger measures, including interceptions and returns. It comes as 151 migrants reached the UK on Saturday, taking the total since the 1st of January to more than 4,100. So what is the answer? Daniel Sohege is a human rights advocate, director of Stand for All, a consultancy offering pro bono policy advice and research for organisations and individuals on human rights issues. Afternoon to you, Dan.
Afternoon, Ian.
Good to have you with us. So talk us through. I've watched with interest a lot of the tweets that you've put out, and clearly you have a lot of concerns primarily about the safety of the individuals trying to cross.
Yes. Obviously, we're seeing a dramatic increase, and no one can deny that. 4,100 up from just shy of 2,000 last year. But it's coming about as we're closing other safe routes for people to access. Now, there's a very easy argument of, well, France is a safe country. Why aren't people staying there? Only last month, France was found guilty in the European Court of Human Rights of violating the rights of refugees, forcing them to sleep rough, depriving them of services. So we need to be looking at what is prompting people to make that journey. If you've got nothing and you're scared of losing, everything like that, you're going to take the risks. Increasing patrols won't stop people doing that. So we need to look at why are people making those journeys? What measures can we put in place working with the French to ensure that we can have family reunification, support, and therefore deal with it on a human level rather than just a political aspect of, like, we need to stop these.
So you're talking, Daniel, about, in fact, making it easier for people to get here.
Well, it's not so much making it easier as making the asylum system more accessible to people so you can actually process the claims properly. Now, we've had cases whereby people are intercepted at airports and stopped from boarding flights. So there's a lot of arguments of why aren't they just catching a flight? If we're processing claims properly and evaluating those claims and dealing with the actual requirements of asylum law for people, then we can cut down on those migrant crossings across the channel.
In terms of the people coming over here, I mean, there's an awful lot said about this. I noticed you used the word vulnerable, and I was a little uncomfortable with that, based on the fact that I wasn't quite sure how you knew people were vulnerable, Dan. I mean, the journey itself renders you vulnerable. I get that. But in terms of somebody's backstory, if you were to say somebody is an economic migrant, not as a pejorative, just merely as identifying, man alive, I don't blame anybody for thinking, I want to better my life, whether you've come from Eritrea, Iran, or wherever it happens to be. But I mean, the smart money seems to suggest that these are economic migrants. They're not necessarily fleeing a war zone. So why vulnerable?
It's, for the definition of refugee, it doesn't have to be fleeing a war zone. It's fear of persecution. It's a well-founded fear to their safety. When you're in that position, you do become vulnerable. I mean, you aren't taking that crossing and that risk, bearing in mind that the Channel is one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, unless you have no other choice to do it. So I would say we are talking about vulnerable people who need support rather than demonisation.
But it doesn't have to be one or the other, does it? I mean, it could be something in the middle. It could be that if you've scrambled together enough money to pay thousands of people to get you on a particular route, if you've gone through several countries, I know we'll come back to that because I know you have a response to that, several safe countries that are, on the list where we understand you are supposed to register your claim, then there's clearly a desire specifically to get to the UK. And that, I think, is where many people scratch their head and say, well, why the desire to get to the UK? I know what you said about the French, but that wouldn't be the case for everybody. France has lots of asylum seekers legally registered there who chose France as their port of call. Why the UK?
There's a number of different reasons. Family reunification. We had the Dubs agreement, which we failed to meet the targets on family reunification for unaccompanied minors. Language. English is one of the most commonly spoken languages. And if you're looking at where people are coming from, English does tend to top French on the number of people who speak it. Now, if you're trying to make your claim and put forward your case why you should have asylum, obviously communication is an important thing. You talk about a very personal, nuanced story. If you fail to do that in France or a number of other EU countries, you risk being sent back to Libya, which is an active war zone. Well, it's active conflict zone. So you need to look at this. There's no simple answer to this. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of people trying to boil it down to sound bites.
Yeah, no, I do get that, and I'm uncomfortable when that happens, but on either side when that happens, and I'm just looking at this thinking, hang on, there's, if I was sensing, and it's not a supermarket, is it? My point is that, when you look around, if you are trying to leg it from some terrible place, well, that might be terrible, as you say, not just because it's a specific war zone, because there could be other issues going on, and you need to get out of there, then I'm not absolutely sure whether your human instinct is to say, well, okay, I'm going to go through Greece, I'm going to go through Switzerland, I'm going to go through France, I'm going to go through Belgium, and I'm eventually going to get back into France, and then I'm going to go to the UK. That doesn't, certainly to the outsider, and maybe you can educate us here a bit, doesn't sound like the sort of set of choices a vulnerable person might go through. They would surely just want to be safe.
They are, if you're looking for somewhere to save, you're going to keep moving until you feel that particular sense of safety, though.
Well, so, Belgium is perfectly safe, we know that. Holland is perfectly safe. Germany is incredibly safe. It has a great track record on taking in migrants, as we know.
Safety is incredibly subjective, though. I mean, for example, I'm a Liverpool fan. If I wear my strip on a particular match day, there are areas where I would not feel safe going for a pint or something like that, which if I wasn't wearing the strip, I'd feel perfectly safe in. It's a very subjective matter, and that's why under international law, it's always a very hazy one, because people recognise and courts recognise that there are a number of factors. It's, do you know people? What language do you speak? That side of things.
Yeah, but that's about desire, isn't it? That's about, in an ideal world, if I was a migrant, then that's what I would be doing. I would, I've never thought for 1 second people come here to, somehow milk the system. You get, 39 quid a week, and you're going to have a pretty tricky time. But you might be able to get yourself into, morph yourself into the sort of grey economy, find yourself working, perhaps off the official cards, and, that ain't a bad life. And I'm not blaming the individual for doing that, but I think it would be helpful if we told it like it is, and that is that this is about economic migration. These are not about vulnerable people fleeing a war zone because they're going to be killed.
The economic migration argument's been massively overstated by a lot of people. There are obviously economic migrants, and no one's denying that. There's also climate change migrants. Whatever the cause, if you fear that at the end of the day you can't afford to survive, you can't afford to live, and you're going to die from starvation, the end outcome is whether you're the same with persecution and a refugee. But a number of these, the economic migration argument has been massively conflated when talking about asylum seekers. When someone goes for their asylum claim, and that's what we need to be looking at here, is processing those claims properly and effectively. All those questions are dealt with, or should be dealt with, and therefore you can properly assess what are the reasons people are coming. Are they a genuine asylum seeker?
Sure, yeah. But you can be an economic... My point is you can be an economic migrant. It doesn't mean to say... when I think of an economic migrant, Dan, just to reiterate, I don't think of somebody who's coming to milk the system. I don't think of somebody who's going to be on 6 trillion quid a month in benefits with a house made of flat screen TVs and any of those old stereo. Yeah. I don't think of that for 1 second. I just think of it in the sense that this is somebody who economically wants to benefit their own life. And I don't blame them for that. And when I look at images, and I know they're anecdotal and you can't really draw full conclusions just from looking at videos, I see mostly fit young men who look as if they can, take care of themselves, who are just looking for a better life.
And there's a legitimate point to that. I mean, the majority of refugees in the world and something are young men. There's no denying that. It costs an awful lot of money. If you're going to become a refugee, a lot of families can only afford to send one person. So you need to send someone who can not only apply and receive that claim, and as I said, that's what we need to be looking at, is the system looking at the claims and being able to support people that way. And then if they are found to have a good asylum claim and given them, then they can start working. Because bear in mind, they can't work legally while they are processing an asylum claim.
Mm.
And then they can save up money to allow their family members to go through the same system. But unless we open the system,
But that's kind of an open policy, isn't it? That's a free for all in that respect.
not really, no, because you're not actually talking that, in the grand scheme of things, that many people. I mean, majority of people don't move unless they absolutely have to, and that's globally. That's whether or not you live in the UK or anywhere else. People don't tend to move from their regions because they know people, they've got family and friends and everything else, unless they absolutely have to. So we're talking about ways and means to support people who absolutely need support.
Okay, what would you? I interviewed David Blunkett recently. Of course, he's a former Labour Home Secretary. He talked about the ongoing headache of this discussion. He had talks with his French counterparts. On and on it went. It was not so much crossing by boat at the time in the method we've seen more recently, but other ways. He said it was never ending at the Home Office. It was always there on the table. Nobody fully solved it. Let's assume, Daniel, at the moment you have an audience with Priti Patel, just like her predecessor and his predecessor and her predecessor. They're all talking tough on this. What's the answer? What are you going to say to Priti Patel tomorrow if you were speaking with her?
As you said, Home Secretaries over the years have all tried and made their claims and nothing's come about. We spent £392 million on immigration enforcement last year. It's about £100 per day to keep someone in immigration detention. Now, rather than looking at increasing those costs to, again, fail, because it's not going to, when people are crossing the channel, it's not going to make a difference. They will continue to make those crossings. If we purpose some of that money to helping areas in this country where they need support and need rebuilding up, to do a parallel process, basically, where you develop in tandem the local community and help deal with serious issues of poverty, rough sleeping, and everything else we have in this country. At the same time, providing support to asylum seekers who you've got the system where you can access it, you can judge the claims fairly, make sure it's effective, and then everyone benefits. You also need to be working with the French authorities to improve the system on their side so that they've recently found to have violated rights, and also the camps that they've got there have been criticised by the UN and others for the dire conditions. Now, if we're helping to support those, provide a durable solution for people, then you help to reduce the number of people who need to cross in the first place.
Okay.
It's not about putting them into detention. It's about using that money to actually support people to cut down on the requirements.
Daniel, great to have you on, sir. Thank you. Daniel Sohege, human rights advocate, director of Stand for All. That's a consultancy offering policy advice and research for organisations and individuals on human rights issues. I think Dan will probably divide the room somewhat on what he said. 0344 499 1000. I've interviewed, I think, every Home Secretary on this point over the last 15 years, and every one of them, I remember Sajid Javid standing there on the White Cliffs of Dover talking about how this is was a national emergency or something of that nature. We're going to send the cutters in, we're going to send the Air Force in, we're going to send the drones in. Never happened. Up pops Priti Patel. She's talking similarly tough on this one. Is that the answer? You listen to Dan there, he's saying, look, we've got to make things sort of slightly easier for the rite of passage there. More of a kind of moral element to the argument. I think by anybody's standards, you haven't got to be right-wing on this. If you've got 4,000 people this year that we know of, and these people are perfectly relaxed, by the way, are getting stopped by the RNLI or the Coast Guards, the Navy, whoever it happens to be. Literally, the French Navy hand over, if you like, control to supervise the safety of those boats to the British Navy. So one goes from one side to the other. I think legally they're not allowed to intervene with the boat until it's safely on shore. And then, of course, they make sure... Now, there's a part of you that thinks, well, what a civilised lot we really are, aren't we? We make sure there's a little baby on one of the ones at the weekend. Man alive, who doesn't want to rescue a baby on a boat? But simultaneously, you can still have sympathy with that. You can still understand why somebody would want to... If I lived in Eritrea, I'd want to be here, for goodness sake. I get that. But you can simultaneously have a robust view on whether or not it is palatable, acceptable, logical, or economical, or whatever phrase you want to throw in, to have just 4,000, just the figure we know of, who've entered this country illegally on boats this year so far.